Welcome to another episode of the Business Speed Podcast. I'm Steve Breitenstein here with Nick Bratton. Super excited to bring you guys another week of what is going on in the world of BSP and the Nomad coach, finding opportunities to continue to be pulled into speed training, even though I'm not doing speed training as my full-time job anymore. So, Nick, how's this week been going for you guys over at BSP?
It's good. This is the week before Mardi Gras. I started off with the week with our staff admitting that I'm a liar. So the way Mardi Gras works is Mardi Gras lands on a Tuesday. The parades happen for 3 or 4 weeks leading up to it, but every day the parades get bigger. And so last night would have been the Thursday before Fat Tuesday, Mardi Gras Day. And normally those are some of our bigger parades. Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday is massive. And so I had told the staff, I'm like, listen, we're going to start to see a drop off this week. And I've been saying this since January 1st. Hey, we've got 7 weeks to get after it. That 8th to 9th week, it's going to drop way off. There are parades going on, Mardi Gras, things like that. So going into this week, I said, listen, things are going to slow down. We're going to have time to get some other things done. Yeah, I was way off. We are about 100 sessions higher than where I expected us to be. And so, yeah, we're rocking and rolling. It's good. The weather's beautiful. The city is partying. No one's getting any work done besides BSP, but it is what it is.
Oh man, it's always fun to hear how this time of year treats you guys. I mean, every season we've had a good episode about what is Mardi Gras' impact on the business. But that's awesome that this year you guys are thriving and going even harder through this time.
Yeah, which is great because 4 weeks ago we were closed down completely for a snowstorm. So welcome to New Orleans.
Man, I love it. And I joked at the intro on this one, but it's funny to see some of these opportunities that are coming my way. As far as just, it's really due to relationship building over the years and continuing to genuinely add value to individuals that are within my network. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about the importance of that for years with our staffs as they're growing and they're trying to expand where they can make a brand for themselves and an impact for themselves. But man, it's pretty neat to just have some people reach out of nowhere and say, hey, would you be interested in running a speed camp? Sure. Yeah. I mean, that'd be fun. Like a couple days. That sounds good without having to be fully committed into it, and then interacting with some of these clubs and being able to really handpick where am I wanting to make an impact. Mm-hmm. We've said in the past is one of the luxuries when I'm not in a facility is that I can pick and choose who do I want to work with, when do I want to work with them, and it allows my no to be a lot stronger than it used to be versus when I would just say yes to everybody. So it's interesting. It's interesting just kind of see the ebb and flow of the year as far as when there's opportunities coming in. So it's fun kind of going in the spring.
And Steve, I think this is a perfect learning opportunity for our young coaches to understand the importance of networking. You network better than almost anybody that I know. You are so good at meeting with people. You've been to a number of universities and presented to them just because you started a conversation. You have these opportunities that pop up just because, you had a conversation with them. The work that you're doing with Winning Leader Now is based on your ability to go out and do some continuing education with Jeremy and the things that he had going on early on and continuing to invest in those relationships. And so that's something that I think is so immensely important is to network, get to know people, and then continue investing in those relationships. It's not enough just to shake a hand, get a name, and then try to call on them 3 years later when you need something from them. So I think that's so important. But here's the other thing too, the importance of having a niche. People call on you. No one is calling on you to put on a weightlifting seminar. No one's calling on you to come in and to write a strength training program for their football team. Now, could you do it? Absolutely. You could do it. But you have niched yourself down so hard on this speed stuff that anytime anybody thinks about speed training for their individual, their team, their group in the Chicagoland area, they know to go to you. And so I think that there are a couple of really good lessons for our young coaches in there and understanding that, networking and knowing your specialty are so important. And again, it doesn't mean you don't educate yourself in other areas, but you need to know what you are the best at.
Yeah, and it's okay to say I want to be really good, and strive to be great at this one aspect.
Yeah.
And because we've shared that in the past too, is to say when I was growing up in this industry, you looked at guys that they would get called in to go and speak at a college, and it was because they were incredible at what they did. Like you could reference like a Derek Hansen gets called in to talk about speed training
Yeah.
relative to Charlie Francis's system and what Derek has evolved it into. Lee Taft gets called in to talk about some of his agility work that he does in basketball speed because that is his niche. We have a plethora of Olympic weightlifting coaches that get called in to talk about Olympic weightlifting. And
Yeah.
so for me, early on in my career, that's what I saw. And it wasn't that you were the guy that was just great at every single thing and that's why people called you. In order to come in and provide value to a program, you've got to be great at something. And it's okay to not have everything else be the thing that you throw out in front, as far as you're not the jumps guy, you're not the weightlifting guy, you're not the powerlifting guy, you're not the fascial guy. It's okay not to be all of those things, but still understand them. But it's spot on. I've challenged so many of my coaches along the way to say, it's okay to not have to try to figure out and dive down every rabbit hole and just go down this one and try to become as great as possible, because you're probably going to add way more value later on to programs and people you interact with.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing is by knowing those things, you become better at the thing that you specialize in. So because you and I are so educated on the muscular system, the neural system, the fascia, we can talk about how that applies to speed training. We don't come on this episode and every single week talk about technique, because sooner or later we're going to run out of content to go over. But we can talk about how all these other things apply. We're testing out a couple of different VBT units this week. We're using Output and Rep One and a couple of others. And one of the things that I was, talking to our staff about is how it applies to what we do from a speed training aspect. Obviously, those are used in the weight room, but how do we use these to further communication with our athletes when we're talking about speed training? How does it become an extension of what we're doing on the track? But we have to have the knowledge, the insight to be able to create that connection between the two. And if you don't have a great understanding of all aspects, then you can never relate it back to the specialty that you are living in.
Mm-hmm. That's such a good point around using some of those devices that are kind of designed and created in the weight room, and to really be able to bridge what you're going to use them for. Because that was a challenge I think that we dealt with for a while around VBT, was to say, it's great. Fundamentally, we love the idea of it. A lot of what was being shared around different best practices was coming from guys that were strength dominant, as far as how they used it to build strength and how they used it to build power. And we said, well, that's great, but we have a speed bias to what we do, where strength training is really a byproduct of that, and it's a support for that. Like, we're not going to follow this type of protocol because it is so weight room intensive. That's just not what we do. And so then we had to have those discussions like you're describing around, well, what will we use it for? How will we adapt what we're doing and make this an integral part of it? And in the end, we did find a way to kind of bridge that into our training as a part of kind of our auxiliary type of training we did in the weight room that we thought would help benefit our speed training. I know we're going to get into that in a minute with some of those outside the box type of training ideas that help with certain aspects of running.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of, hop into some of that speed work, I had texted you a little bit earlier, a topic that I've been thinking about. The example that I had in my facility is I've got a girl who, I've been working with for 6 or 7 years, and she's extremely strong, extremely athletic, extremely explosive. And when you look back through our training, you can see an evolution in the training. This is somebody that I've seen twice a week, every week for the last 8 years. And so, we cannot continue to rely on, like you were talking about, the strength aspect of things. We can't continue to rely on, how heavy is our squat? How heavy is our deadlift? because at some point we're just training a really good a weightlifter. Now, I don't like when coaches rely on that excuse when they're working with someone that they've been working with for a year. Work with someone for a couple of years and then you can start to really niche down. But with this girl, I was talking to our staff about this a little bit earlier this week. When you do the same movement over and over and over again, not only are you training the force that you are creating and the rate of force development, but the speed of the contraction. And the reason that we were bringing it up is because we have so many volleyball players that are coming to us right now that are saying that they're going out and running miles for conditioning. And so we were talking about, like, how does this impact our jump? When your rate of force development and the speed of that contraction is that slow and you're out jogging and running a 7 or 8 minute mile, and then you go in and you try to jump with the same type of speed of contraction, it's going to take away from that jump ability. And so same thing when we're talking about these track athletes and we're talking about training them and you're just using the weight room to go through these slow, heavy lifts, it's going to impact your speed training. So the thing that I brought up to you was the exercises that we use to help build the speed of contraction specific to our stride. We understand, and coaches should understand, that there's not just a muscular, but also a neural aspect of this. And not only are we training the muscular contraction, we're training the neural pathway, the speed of the signaling, the speed across the synapse to be able to create that contraction. And that's what I think is really important, about how we design and implement this training. Are we putting things together that help the body to recognize the movement they're going through? Because again, remember that, we create stronger neural pathways. There's myelination that happens when the movement is done over and over and over again. So if your training doesn't look at least a little bit similar to the action that they're going to go through, there's no myelination there. And so I'm not making an argument for sport specificity in the weight room, but I am making an argument for some level of comprehension of the movements that we're going through after we've created the strength and the power requisite. Then where do we go from a movement standpoint? So I know that's a long intro, but Steve, I want to open it up to you because I know that this is something that you're passionate about. You've done a lot in, and I honestly want to kind of pick your brain from that standpoint as far as how you put those drills together.
Well, yeah, I mean, I went through a little bit of that rabbit hole to say, like, I just kept getting further and further away from force development and intentionally just challenging myself to say, if I really challenge myself to get away from force development, what is my value add to these athletes? And you're kind of hinting at some of like the Franz Bosch kind of sport specific stuff. And I think there is value in some of those special strength movements. Mm-hmm. I think that you said, like, not making a full argument that's all you should be doing, but where I really went when I was visualizing and conceptualizing this topic as when I was coaching full time was to say, so many of the exercises and drills that we're doing have kind of this aggressive start-stop feel to them. And that's the complete opposite of running. It's the complete opposite of athletic movement. Even when we're super heavy on deceleration work, my challenge to that always was, we're measuring this intense deceleration. And when I see coaches doing like a 10-yard sprint and then they're measuring how fast you can stop afterwards, I get it in nature, but like that doesn't ever happen in sport. Mm-hmm. And so I always looked at that to say, like, we're not really stopping. It's a rhythm and a fluidity of a contract, relax, or a redirect. And that was part of where I was looking to, like, how creative can we get without just checking the box of being creative for the sake of being creative. There's a lot of coaches that innovate and just come up with crazy crap that no one could possibly measure if it's helping their athletes or not. Usually their presentation involves, I feel like this is helping. Yeah, okay, I get that. But as long as it falls within that category, I like it. I mean, the one that is tried and true that we all have utilized would be your A runs. You know, whether they're banded, whether they're not, whether they're progressively rising or not. Like, that fundamentally has been the exercise that when I share with my athletes, I go, very few of the exercises that we do and the drills we have you do can really work on frequency. This is the one. of any of them that we do, this is the one that you can challenge yourself to go all out frequency wise and try to push to get 4 to 5 contacts per second, which would equal that you're sub 1 and you're flying 10. And that is our one challenge point. So that's where it all kind of started, with that idea of like our A run is already built in. We've done it for years. Sometimes we do it casually and just passing, which I've seen a lot of coaches utilize it that way. It's just part of the A series we do in warmups. But in reality, that is one of the most aggressive frequency builders I think you can do, that makes clear sense that it really looks like what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, building on that, that's something that I'll even use in some of our speed progressions too. I just had a girl in last week. Her team just won the 5A state soccer championship this past weekend. And one of the things that we were working on the week prior was she didn't feel like she was able to accelerate quickly when she needed to break on the ball. And as we were doing some film study, we realized like she had no change in her posture. Like her posture stayed the same throughout, whether she was accelerating or just jogging down the field. And so one of the drills that I use in situations like that is an A run to an acceleration, because they get used to maintaining a certain frequency. They get used to that movement up and down, as opposed to more of that cyclical movement and upright sprinting. And so having them go through that A run and then just leaning into an acceleration and teaching them like, hey, listen, keep the rhythm the same, keep the stride rate the same. All I want you to do is get as aggressively into this acceleration position as you can. And then that allows us to get to exercises where we're almost jogging into an acceleration, and she can feel the change in her posture and positioning. Yeah, I think that's a great drill and something that we use within our progressions as well.
I think it kind of starts there, and then you can get as crazy as you want to. I mean, we can talk about this just briefly, but like the tantrum type work, the banded oscillation stuff, I know, and I don't want to say that Cal Dietz is wrong. It's hard to say that. The man researches everything extensively. Anecdotally, I have never felt / seen a direct carryover from incorporating those to my athletes looking better, running faster. I just haven't. And I've spent time. I've invested time into it. I understand the science / reasoning behind it, but I have just not really seen those be effective for any aspect of what I'm trying to have my athletes do. Have you guys played with those much?
We do play with them, and we do use them, especially at end of season type situations. So when our track athletes, or even, like the soccer players that I was talking about, when they get toward the end of their season and we're talking like championship phase where we're 4 to 6 weeks out, that is something that we will use. It's something that within training, I want them to be able to, because we talk all the time about rhythm and fluidity and movement. I want them to be used to and accustomed to that rate of contraction relaxation. Being able to recognize that, to be able to handle that. Again, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I'm a big believer in a lot of the reason for muscle cramps is that the muscles are not used to what we're putting them through. They're not used to the level of contraction, relaxation, or the intensity that we put them at for a long period of time. So whether it helps in speed, whether it helps in injury reduction, whether it helps in just being able to optimize performance for a longer duration in the match, we will use those, the tantrum kicks, the banded oscillations that you were talking about toward the end of the season for most of our athletes that are going to at least be top end or upright sprinting for 15 or longer meters in a competition like soccer, like track and field. We're probably not going to use it a whole lot in our basketball players or football players, or they're not going to put that level of stress and requirement on their muscular system.
Yeah, I think that's a great reasoning for it. Going to one exercise beyond that one that I actually do like, but it's so simple in nature, is leg swings. Like for years and years and years, they were the passive warm-up exercise that we did, where you just go on the wall and lazily swing your leg back and forth. I'll say I'll give huge props. Like Corfist always gives great creative exercises. If you've ever seen one of his presentations, Sometimes they're just completely outside the box. And I mean, I've
Yeah.
seen Tony Holler even talk about the fact that Corfus is so innovative and pushes what he believes is valuable that year to year you barely can recognize really what he's doing. And Tony's like, but like a year ago you were a good speed coach, but now this year you say all of that was garbage, and now you're doing this instead because this is way better. So it's hard sometimes to say like, oh man, I can't even keep up because he's constantly pushing it. But he shared a video and he said, just having my athletes stand one leg on a slightly elevated box so the other leg can swing freely without hitting the ground, and having them swing that as fast as humanly possible back and forth, where it's not passive, it's aggressively swinging forward and aggressively swinging back. So you're having to rapidly decelerate it with a minimal time decelerating to redirect going the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And then what's funny is at TC Boost, we had this huge box of ankle weights that never got used, and they were just covered in spider webs and dust. And when we started incorporating those, that was the movement that we would put a 1 pound weight on your ankle and now just try to swing. And the challenge was that you're not trying to use your whole leg to make this movement happen. You're trying to have it come from the hip. And so it becomes this hip dominant action where you're trying to use, if you can just isolate, so as essentially, but like you're really trying to go for your hip flexion muscles without letting it be a quad dominant action. And then on that back swing, you're really making it a hip glute extension exercise where you're getting both those. And that was one that you really could see athletes struggling to even perform it as a rhythmic, kind of just a neuromuscular movement at first. And it took a bit of time for it to get better.
Yeah.
Now, I will say it frustrated some of our coaches that were more in the strength space mentally to say, I can't coach this. Like, I have to let my athlete kind of struggle in it, and they have to figure it out. It's not a squat. It's not a bench. Like, you can't control it and have them thinking through it because the contractions are happening so rapidly that they've got to get the feel for the contract, relax rhythm that goes on. That's been an exercise I really, really enjoy.
Yeah. That gets me fired up on a different topic. But one of the things that I like to do is like study the development of the human body of people who've been in a sport for more than 5 or 10 years. And one of the things that you'll notice, because like every sport, and you know this, Steve, when you look at athletes that have been playing a sport for a long period of time, you notice that there are certain commonalities within those athletes. Softball players tend to have larger hips, really thick legs, just because of how they apply force. Track athletes tend to be really thick right around the hip joint. So like you'll see a lot of development and a lot of muscle tone right at the top of the quads, the top of the hamstrings, right around the hips. But you won't necessarily, it's not like a football player where you'll see a really big and developed VMO. You won't see, and some athletes, like 200, 400 runners, you won't see real big hamstring muscle bellies. You might see it in like 100 runners. But I think that kind of points back to the topic that you were just talking about. When we talk about like these things like these leg swings and these rapid flexion extension movements, we're really developing those muscles right around the hip. You discussed the psoas, biceps femoris, the ability to really decelerate that muscle very, very quickly and then reaccelerate it in the opposite direction. And you begin to train very specific areas of those muscles. And I think, again, this comes back to this whole topic that we're talking about. We're not talking about just sport specificity in the weight room, but we are talking about recognizing the muscles that will be recruited most often, being able to have exercises in your pocket that are the most specific to what we need to go through and how we're going to use these. When you go to the Olympic training center, you're not going to see people that are just doing deadlifts, RDLs, front squats, and lunges. It goes further than that because, again, these athletes have been training for so much longer than the athletes that we're seeing in a high school weight room. And I'm not, trying to diss or badmouth anybody. It's just understanding that there are different levels of training and being able to make sure that we are adapting our programming based on, the individual right in front of us.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because you find, and this goes back to our topic of frequency as well. We talk about, man, we can't work this muscle so often, otherwise it's going to essentially die. Like it's overworked, it's just going to rip apart. But the more you kind of look into like what you were just describing, to say a softball player, a certain like track athlete, I always think about the cyclists that they'll always show that
Yeah.
just have these ginormous
Yes.
quads and
Yes.
calves.
Yes.
And there is a level of your body will adapt when you're getting that stimulus all the time. And so then it's kind of our job as coaches to say, well, do I need to do more of this, or do I need to balance this out a little bit? Is this becoming dangerous? Are they underdeveloped in this area that they really need? Where am I really adding value? A track athlete who does track all the time, they might be getting great psoas development. So I may not need to do as much of this because they're getting great reps and they have good form with it. Now, if they're a track athlete that is limited in their form and they're a weaker athlete, maybe I need to do more of these hip flexion exercises. Because we saw, I think the research maybe a year ago when it was like, that is the muscle group that is so different for track athletes relative to just your average human.
Yeah.
Is their hip flexion development. They have a way more developed, which makes sense when you think about, okay, let's think about gymnasts. What does a male gymnast have way better definition and growth from? It's like their biceps and their back and shoulders are just ridiculous relative to a normal person. A cyclist, you kind of go through all these different sports and you understand the specificity and the frequency that those muscles are being worked beyond the 2 workouts you're doing in the weight room. Yeah. But as a coach, we got to understand where's our biggest value at.
Well, and this reminds me, there's a segment we need to bring back, the resources that I recommend. So if this is something that interests you, one of the resources that I love is Power Positions by Andrea Hootie, because in that book, she talks about this for a lot of the athletes that she's worked with and how the body adapts throughout the season, not just throughout a lifetime, but throughout a season. And so she talks about how she adjusts her training. Andrea is most known for her work with basketball. Obviously being with Kansas basketball for so long, and then she went and she joined UConn basketball. And so she's known for that, but she also talks about the work that she's done with golfers and tennis players and baseball players and how bodies go from, a body of mobility to a body of strength, from a body of rigidity to fluidity based on the sports that they're playing. Some sports create more fluidity throughout the body, things like golf, in certain rotational aspects. But then there are other sports that create more rigidity. When you think about things like track or like baseball players in certain areas, because they do the same movement over and over and over again. And so again, Power Positions is a great book that kind of talks about like how you adapt your training based on the impact on your body throughout the competition season.
I love it. I think it's a great conversation for online, is like just sharing what are some of those exercises that are a little outside the box that really feel are frequency drivers. And I'd love to hear from other coaches, because there are a number of people that are pretty innovative in some really cool ways. There's some innovation that makes you question everything. There's some innovation that you go, that can't be serious. But it's good to have that conversation going to kind of push us outside of what are we just taking for granted, that this is how we're supposed to train. And it is really easy with a majority of what we can measure, what we can load and progress, becomes a force-driven bias. And so it is difficult to find those things that are frequency-driven or rhythm-driven exercises that the inner strength coach in all of us wants to measure and wants to progress. It's hard to just be okay with saying, this is a good movement, but there really is no progression to it. There's no way to measure it. I just know it's good for you. So sharing those would be huge.
Yeah, absolutely. So Steve, yesterday you posted on something that I think is so important, and I'm so interested to hear your thoughts on it. But you posted on multitasking. We all think that we can multitask. We all think that we're the one person in the world that is able to multitask and do multiple things at one time. But a study that you saw basically negates that. So, what did you see? What are your thoughts? What was this post about?
Yeah. The reason was we're having so many conversations about some hiring processes that I've been talking to individuals that have been going through it, and even individuals that are kind of interviewing people, and they're just kind of bouncing ideas about questions they're asking. And a question that kept coming up was like, I'm asking them their ability to multitask or handle multiple tasks coming their way, or they asked me about how am I able to handle like doing this and this at the same time. And I was curious because I'm like, man, I know I've heard something about that's not really possible,
Yeah.
but for me, I always turned that off and said, I am that one person. But when I looked at it, it really said that over the course of research, there's only less than 2% of the people in the world can truly multitask.
Yeah.
Everyone else's brain is wired to focus on a singular task. And what happens is, as you focus on that singular task, your brain gets better and better at being able to perform that task because it's dialing in even more of its energy and focus to performing the task in front of you. It's problem solving. It's getting creative solutions. It's just getting better at what, if it's repetitive, it's creating a cleaner kind of pattern that you're able to utilize to make it a more efficient project you're working on. That's how your brain is wired.
Yeah.
2% of us are able to multitask effectively. And what it said beyond that was that there can be a detriment of up to 40% of the quality of work that you're doing when you're trying to constantly multitask.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is terrifying to say of all the times, of all the days, 40%. And that 40% means, just to break that down further, because it's a huge number, but just to say that it's a combination of the speed that you were able to get the task completed and the accuracy, so the amount of errors. So combining those two kind of qualifiers together, you had a 40% reduction in the quality of work you're doing.
Yeah. Well, so another great resource here. Deep Work by Cal Newport talks about the same thing. And what you're referring to is task switching. Because what you're actually doing when you think you're multitasking is you're just rapidly task switching back and forth from one thing to another thing. And what the problem with this is it creates cognitive residue. This cognitive residue is basically the brain power that you would be able to, and this is the 40% you're talking about, the brain power that you would be able to designate to one task is now left on the old task. And so those neurons, the things that would be firing to focus on the one thing, are still left trying to conceptualize, understand, problem solve, whatever on the thing that you were doing before, whether you recognize it or not. And so, because I'm with you, Steve, even when I read Deep Work, I thought to myself, I'm part of the 2%. And I would intentionally try to do multiple tasks at once until I felt myself burn out on it. But yeah, I think that it's something that we don't recognize. And I think we spoke on this a couple of episodes ago, but talking about how we design our work schedule, our work day, how we designate times that we're spending on certain things, that is what's helped me. When I've said, okay, this half hour or this hour, I'm only focusing on this one thing, that is what allows me to really dedicate 100% focus to it. And it keeps me from bouncing to other things because I know that I have dedicated other time for those things at another point in my day. What tends to ruin this, and I am in this position right now, is we work in one large office. I do not have my own office. So oftentimes there will be conversations going on, or a lot of times what happens is someone will ask me a question, or we'll have a client pop in the door, and then that creates task switching. Even when someone asks, hey, can I just switch my appointment from tomorrow at 10 to tomorrow at 4? Well, when you do that, that seems simple to you, but you've pulled me from my task. And so we have to understand that when we are going deep on task, we have to create space for that too. So when I am writing, or when I am working on new proposals or plans, or working on processes within the business, I know that I have got to go to a coffee shop somewhere, put myself in the corner, put my headphones in, because I can't do it at home because I have kids running around like you do. I can't do it at the facility because there's always someone who needs something. I've got to go to a designated space where I can be away so that I can put all of my energy and attention into it.
Yep. protecting your attention.
Yeah.
It's that idea, and that's the part that a lot of leaders, owners, managers struggle with, is to say, well, I want to be there for my employees. I want to be there for my team. Because to say, I just need to get away from everybody, to them, it feels like, oh man, that's bad leadership. That's bad managing. I should be there in case they have a question. I should be able to answer everything. But when we reframe it and say, well, you just need to protect your attention, and to say that this task is so important to the future of the business, to what you're doing for your team, for your employees, that you've got to be able to protect it. And that's how you frame it. And you encourage everyone else to also protect it. But then at the same time, you have to be willing to protect their attention as well.
Yes.
Because oftentimes, as a manager or leader, if you start to delegate, you delegate 5 things. I give Nick 5 projects that he needs to get done. I didn't really protect his attention. To go one step further, I can say, here's 5 things. This is the priority. I need you to get this one done, then this one, then this one. If we can't get to number 5, that's okay, but I need those first 3 done. And I need them in that order. Okay, that's one step to protecting it. Number 2 is, I'm not going to then bother Nick by adding things on. I'm not going to then sidetrack him with questions. If I notice that Nick is in a space where he's able to do deep work, I'm not going to interrupt that, because I'm going to protect his time and attention as well. So it goes both ways when you are leading others and leading yourself. Is not only do you need to protect your attention, but you have to be somebody who helps protect their attention, because that's equally a challenge.
Absolutely. Well, in the way that I think you illustrated that beautifully. The way that I also explain it is, I want to show up with 100% of me for you. And so it is something where you get 0 or 100. If I'm not here, then you get 0. But when I am here and I am available, you get 100, which is better than you getting 30 or 40 or 50% of me all day long, because I'm going to forget things. I'm going to do them quickly. I'm going to place whatever is left of me there for you and what you need. And so I will show up with 100% when I have the time and the availability to show up with 100% for you, which is the same thing that I would ask too. If I'm asking you something, I don't want you to put 30% of your effort into the answer or the solution or whatever you're working on. I want you to put 100% into it. But that also means that I have to understand, just like you alluded to, you're going to do it when you have the availability, the bandwidth, the space to put 100% of you into it.
Yeah. And on the front end, I understand it's a mental challenge to say, well, this is going to have us getting less done. There's no way this is way more effective for us to do it. And as Nick and I said, we're as guilty as anyone.
Yep.
That we will take on multiple tasks. We will try to do things at the same time, because that's what the time frame, that's what the schedule says that needs to happen. It happens. No, I'm not perfect about it. Although I'm sharing this is more of it was a challenge that I read it again and I reflected on it. I said, man, I'm not doing a good enough job at that. But I want to share this message for anybody else that's in the same place that I am, not from a point to say that I am better than you, but to say I'm in there with you. Like, I struggle too. I'm saying yes to too many things, and I'm trying to get too many things done at the same time. And they went one level deeper on some of the things they talked about, and were saying that a future pattern that is very concerning when we talk about screen time and all of the negative influences of screen time on a adolescent into high school aged athlete, they spend between 7.5 and 9 hours of screen time a day on their phone. That's a fact of research. So if that's new to you, that is a research fact, which is terrifying.
Yeah.
But the stat that was even more concerning that they were highlighting was, when we talk about this idea of multitasking, 75% of that time is spent on multitasking media. And so when we talk about our brain not being able to really go deep into a topic, and we can't do deep work, not only are our athletes struggling because of just screen time as a whole and what that represents, but within the screen time, their brain is constantly challenged as far as just task switching from different medias to text, to then watching a video, to then listening to a song, to then watching something that they're scrolling through. And again, so if you have that 7 to 9 hours, on top of life's tasks of trying to multitask, you're really underdeveloping a skill that is so valuable to really be able to get things done. When we talk about task driven jobs that come out, how
Yeah.
are we using tech to solve it? Man, we're setting ourselves up to really struggle. So, Nick, for you, what have you seen from any of your athletes as we're kind of wrapping up? Have you guys made a change or a way to influence them to kind of help reduce some of that confusion from media mixing and all these different tasks? How have you guys helped your athletes?
Yeah, yeah. So, I think the first thing is making them aware, and just like you alluded to, people don't realize that it's 7 to 9 hours, but, we have a dry erase board here in our facility, and every week we ask different questions. One of the questions that we asked was, show us your screen time, show it on your phone and write it down. And you would be surprised. We had people writing 18 hours down, 17 hours, 16 hours of screen time, and not fighting it. They knew they had 18 hours of
Oh
screen
yeah,
time. And we're having a conversation. I'm like, listen, you sleep for 6 to 8 hours.
you're
You
supposed
ha-
to.
yeah, you,
Yeah,
you had a meal. So when you had that meal, you didn't talk to anybody.
just sat
You were on
scrolling.
your phone, and so it's baffling. So I think the first thing is understanding that that's going on. Then the second level of it, and I think it depends on who you're talking to, is understanding that one, what it does to your brain. What is that level of screen time? Because here's the other thing: we talk about deep work. Deep work is where we are truly training our brain. We're truly causing the brain to work as a muscle, to understand thought, to really conceptualize ideas and concepts, to be able to apply those conceptualizations. Whereas social media, you're not working at all. You're just consuming. You're just
Yeah.
skimming. You're barely using your brain at all. And so it's just like exercise and training. If all we're ever doing is just using our brain to consume, just to watch, just to be entertained, then we're never truly working it, and it's becoming weaker and weaker and weaker. And so helping athletes understand that, one, it's not great for our brain. It's hurting our brain health. Two, emotionally, it's having an impact on us. It's hurting us as emotional beings and how we understand relationships, communication that's going on. And three, how it impacts the other things that we're doing. How it impacts our training, how it impacts our school, how it impacts all the other aspects of our life. So, one, understanding that it's there, it's happening. Then two, understanding, okay, how is this impacting the rest of my life? And how do we make changes? How do we make adjustments? Things like that.
I love it, Nick. I think that's the challenge for all of us as we wrap up this episode is to say, take a look at what's going on in your day to day and where can you protect your attention better and not take on that extra task.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that it's unlikely, although we'd love to say we are, it's unlikely that we actually are one of those 2% of the population that can multitask well. Until next time, guys, we appreciate you guys listening.